Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Takara One, or you can call me Teeks. It is whichever one that you would prefer to call me. And in today's video, I'm going to be giving you guys 10 sewing myths that you need to stop believing, okay? Because this is what is causing you not to want to learn how to sew, not to want to take that leap and learn the skill to sew so that you can be a fashion designer or get into fashion design. You can literally do this from home. So yeah, I feel like you need to just stop believing these sewing myths. We need to jump over these hurdles and get to it. Okay, so sewing myth number 1 is going to be that you need a super expensive sewing machine to sew well, I guess you would say. That is not true. I used to think that I would have to buy like a super expensive sewing machine, like I needed a sewing machine plus a serger plus an industrial machine in order to get my designs down packed, and that is not true. Okay, I actually was gifted my sewing machine, so I did get my first sewing machine. It was gifted to me. But they do have really great machines. If you go to different vintage shops or even the Goodwill, check your local thrift stores, you can probably find a really great sewing machine, probably like a Singer, maybe even a Kenmore, maybe even a Brother machine. Those type of really great beginner machines for sometimes people come across these really great machines for like 20 bucks, 30 bucks, less than 20 bucks, okay? But you just have to be on the hunt when you're out. Also, you can find a very inexpensive machine on Amazon, online. If you're willing to spend 100 bucks on a sewing machine, you can, okay? And you can still sew very, very well. If you're not able to spend or drop 100 bucks on a sewing machine, I would recommend this be the time that you focus on like hand sewing, learning how to hand sew, something that doesn't involve using the machine. But you do not have to have a super expensive machine when it comes to first starting to learn how to sew. Okay, so that is a myth. The machine doesn't have to be super expensive in order for your designs to come out well. That is all on you, okay? The construction of your designs is all going to be on how well you continue to go and shoot in the gym, basically, okay? You gotta continue to shoot in the gym. You gotta continue to brush up on your craft so that your designs can be very have great craftsmanship and be very precise, very professional looking, you know, and look very good, okay? That's not just all on the machine. That's on you as well, in your hands and how you are as a designer. Sewing myth number 2, which I just kind of semi-mentioned in sewing myth number 1, is that hand sewing is outdated and unnecessary. That is not true. If you are somebody who wants to do more elegant designs, you want to do like beaded work, if you are somebody who is going to be draping, you're gonna need to know how to hand sew in a sense, okay? For certain different techniques, certain techniques like basting is when how you kind of like pull a drape off of the mannequin and bring it to the sewing machine. So a lot of people always wonder, well, how do you get your design from the drape to the sewing machine without the patterns or the pieces falling apart? You hand sew on the mannequin, which requires you to learn a basting stitch. So that's one stitch that you would have to hand sew in order to transfer your design that you draped over to the sewing machine. So hand sewing will never be outdated. A lot of people who do, you know, that, like you said, like delicate beading and things, either on like prom dresses or like wedding dresses, like all of that requires hand sewing. So hand sewing will never be an outdated skill that you don't need to learn just because you learn sewing on the machine. There are parts of sewing that do require you to hand sew, and I feel like you can, even though they have button tools for you to do on the sewing machine, you also can hand sew your buttons. So I don't think it's a skill that will ever be outdated or unnecessary. I think that's a myth. You definitely should learn how to hand sew to a sense, okay? Like I'm not like a advanced hand sewing, but I do know some hand sewing techniques, okay? Like I'm not just oblivious to hand sewing. So that's just a myth. Okay, all right, so sewing myth number 3 is going to be you must follow every sewing pattern or pattern correctly or the exact way. And I don't necessarily agree with this. I feel like if you are gonna buy a store-bought pattern or a pattern on Etsy, whatever the case may be, I feel like you don't have to follow it to the exact of what they are saying. I love to modify patterns and make them my own, make them into my own designs, or use patterns for certain things. Like if I like maybe a blouse sleeve on a certain pattern, I might just use the blouse sleeve and use it and put it into another design that is not from the exact same pattern. So I don't necessarily think that you have to follow patterns to exactly what they say. Okay, like you can, this is your world, this is your design world. You can create whatever you want to create. I feel like use the pattern as a guide and bring your creativity with that pattern, if you get what I'm saying. So no. So sewing myth number 4, that's 8. 4. Sewing myth number 4 is going to be, and I actually have to do my nails as well, but don't mind that. Anyways, sewing myth number 4 is going to be that sewing is for grandmas. That's not true. Sewing is not only for grandmas. Do I look like a grandma? Okay. Maybe I do look like a grandma to y'all, but I don't care. Okay? I would rather much be a grandma. Anyways, but no. Sewing is not just for grandmas. You can teach your kids how to sew. You can sew you can teach your teens how to sew. If you're in your 30s, 40s, like sewing does not have an age. It's not just for grandmas. I don't know where people came up with that. Sewing is a very peaceful skill, a very, very peaceful hobby. I love it. It can be peaceful at times, because don't get me wrong, okay? Sewing is a very, sometimes I'll be fighting my sewing machine, but I feel like it brings me like, oh, sometimes like I just love going to the sewing machine. Once I have all the like the really extreme stuff done, like putting the pattern together, once I just get in that smooth ride of like driving the sewing machine, I just love it. So it just brings me a sense of peace and joy. But no, sewing is not just for grandmas. Anybody of any age can sew. So I don't know where this little myth came from that if you sew you're a grandma, but it's not true. Sewing is a very, very cool, I feel like, creative power to have. So if you know how to sew, you're lit. Okay? Alright, so the next sewing myth that I have is that so sewing myth number 5 is going to be that you can't sew without a dress form. That's not true. That's not true. You can definitely sew without a dress form. I started learning how to sew before I had my dress form. Am I happy now that I have my dress form? Yes, because I can be more creative with the dress form and create more designs, since I have the 3D shape to be able to create different designs. But starting off sewing, I just use sewing patterns, and I would just create things with the sewing patterns from flat making sewing. Flat pattern making is a little bit more, like, it is a little bit challenging, but it's not hard to learn. But yeah, you can sew without having a dress form. You don't necessarily have to have a dress form to sew, but it's really cool to have one. But it's not a necessity to learn how to sew. You can definitely make really, really cool designs without actually having a dress form. So I don't know who said that, but it's definitely a myth. Okay, so do not steer from learning how to sew because you don't have a dress form. Okay, that's just not true. So let's go to sewing myth number 6. So sewing myth number 6 is going to be that pinning is always necessary before sewing. And not necessarily. You don't have to always pin. Sometimes I don't always pin. Sometimes I don't always use pins. Sometimes I'll just use clips, which you can get clips. I really love clips. I've been using clips more just because, like I said, I always say safety reasons. I use pins more when I drape, but I love to clip, or sometimes I just use weights. You can use weights to before you sew. But once you kind of get a little bit more into the groove of things, you kind of like when somebody's cooking and they don't really need measurements. Like I feel like that's what pinning is. Like once you get more to like the immediate advance, you know, you learn more, you kind of really relieve yourself from needing to pin everything all the time. But it's not like, I don't feel like it's necessary. I feel like when you're a beginner, you pin so that way you can see your markings. But yeah, it's not a necessity. I definitely feel like that's a myth. But yeah, There's other things that you can do outside of pinning to keep everything in place. Like I said, clips, weights, etc. So, a 7th sewing myth that I'm going to give you guys is that pre-washing fabric is optional. I don't feel like this is optional. I feel like you should always pre-wash your fabrics because you want to be able to know what if it shrinks. You want to be able to see that. That way when you iron it back out, you have like a precise way to be able to cut the exact measurement of what you need. You just need to know how much length and width of the fabric that you're gonna have, and once you wash it and it like shrinks, you'll be able to see the real length of your fabric, and you'll be able to see like if the fabric changes colors or if it like leaks, you know what I mean, like or what am I trying to say, like the dye leaks, whatever the case may be. I always feel like it's important to pre-wash fabric. I don't feel like this is optional. I feel like you should definitely always pre-wash your fabrics so that way you can see what you're dealing with before you actually just create something, cut it up, create something, make the piece, and then you put it in the washing machine and it's just a hot mess. Okay, you're gonna be mad. So pre-wash your fabrics, okay? Please do that for me. Okay. All right, so sewing myth number 8 is going to be that more expensive fabrics means that you get better results. That is not true, honey boo boo child, okay? I don't know who told you that if you pay more for fabric that you're going to get better results. No. Like I said, you have to shoot in the gym, all right? I don't know why my part is not part. But like I said, you need to be shooting in the gym so that you can get better with your craft, because the fabric is not, sometimes the fabric can save you, but every time the fabric, just because you pay more for a fabric, that doesn't mean that the design is going to be perfect. We've seen it before, but people pay all this money for expensive prom dress fabric and the prom dress still looks a hot mess. Okay, so no, you need to be making sure that you're investing in yourself when it comes to learning the craft of sewing and design. Like, you gotta get in there. The fabric, the expensive fabrics are not gonna save you. This is a myth, okay? Don't just go spend all this money. You can literally get a $3 shirt from the Goodwill. You can literally get a $3 shirt from the thrift store and whatever, and make a super cool design out of it, and it costs you nothing. So that's not true. Although I love pretty and expensive looking fabrics, I feel like the craftsmanship of what you are creating is going to be what's more important, not just the fabric. So yeah. So sewing myth number 9 is going to be that you can't sew stretch fabrics without a serger. Okay, this is most definitely a myth. You can definitely sew stretch fabrics without a serger. You do not need a serger. I don't know who told y'all this. Who told you that you needed a serger? You don't necessarily need a serger. You can use a zigzag stitch to finish off your what am I trying to say? Stretch fabrics. You always want to use a zigzag stitch when you're using stretch fabrics because it stretches, and the zigzag stitch is what's going to make you be able to keep the fabric being stretchy for you to get into it. But you don't have to have a serger to do that. A serger is recommended, but you don't need a serger to be able to sew any stretch fabric. So don't spend all of that extra money on a serger thinking that you need that in order to work with really stretchy and, like, you know, the stretchy, tight fitting fabrics. Start with your regular sewing machine. Use your zigzag stitch. Start from there. And then once you kind of want to get into that mode where you're like, okay, I really want the kind of like store-bought looking insides of my clothing, then invest in a sewing, like a serger. I would recommend that. I always say recommend in a serger when you're gonna start having, like, when you're really gonna start having clients. But if you're just like in the learning phase and you're just sewing for yourself, or maybe even like friends and family, use that zigzag stitch, honey, okay, on your regular sewing machine. You don't have to invest all that money into a serger quite yet, okay? Listen to what I'm telling you. That's a myth. Did I spit? Anyways, okay. So the last sewing myth that I have for you guys is that mistakes ruin a project. I don't think this is true. I feel like this is a myth. Like, there's been time where I made mistakes on a project and I actually loved it, and I was like, oh, like, okay, I'm actually glad that I messed up because I actually like the way that this looks. So it's a learning curve. I don't feel like every mistake on a project ruins a design or ruins the project. Sometimes mistakes end up being the biggest blessings. Okay, they end up being the best, coming out with the best design, something that you like, oh, I didn't even think. Depending on what it looks like, you'll know if the project is ruined. But sometimes when you decide, you end up making a mistake and then you end up changing the design, it ends up coming out better. So not every mistake, I would say, ruins a project. I feel like that can be a myth. And like I said, this is a learning process, so don't beat yourself up when you make mistakes, okay? Mistakes are going to happen. When you're creating, you're going to need a seam ripper. When you're sewing, like, that's probably going to be your #1 tool that you're going to be using, especially as a beginner designer. So don't avoid being like, oh, I need to get the project right on the first go around. I'm not even a beginner and I don't get my projects done. I don't get my projects perfect on the first go around. So it's not always going to happen that way. That's not how design works. You're going to be reworking and like going back to the drawing board a few times before you get to the final design, and you have to be okay with that, and mistakes are okay. Okay, so yeah, those are my 10 sewing myths that I feel like you should stop believing, okay, that you need to stop believing. If you guys have any sewing myths that you want to chime in on and include, you can drop them in the comments below. I would love to hear your sewing myths, as well as which one of these surprised you the most. Which sewing myth surprised you the most? I want to hear in the comments below. But other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I thought it was fun. I had wrote these down and I was like, oh, I'm gonna film this video today because I forgot I wrote these sewing myths down. And I thought it would just be fun to bring them to light for you guys and see if you guys could agree as designers or beginner sewers, or as people who are just curious about wanting to learn how to sew. But yeah, until the next video, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I love you guys, and I will see you at the